The reluctant arrangement. Penny Foster's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the delicate silver pendant at her throat, a family heirloom that seemed wildly out of place against the borrowed designer gown. The museum curator was far more comfortable surrounded by ancient artifacts and scholarly journals than preparing for a night among Boston's elite. "Olivia, I can't believe I let you talk me into this," she murmured, turning to her roommate who was frantically making last-minute adjustments to Penny's upswept hair. "You're saving my career," Olivia replied, securing another hairpin. "My event planning business can't afford to lose the Westfield account." When Julian's actual date canceled, he was furious. One night of pretending, that's all. Penny sighed, examining her reflection. At 32, she was no ingenue, but the midnight blue gown transformed her usual academic appearance into something almost glamorous. Her auburn hair was styled in an elegant twist, and subtle makeup enhanced her hazel eyes. "Remember everything I told you?" Olivia continued. "Julian Westfield built Horizon Technologies from nothing. He's brilliant but intensely private. The tech magazines call him the reclusive innovator. Just smile, make pleasant conversation, and don't ask about his family. That's apparently off limits." "Wonderful." "I'm pretending to date a moody billionaire with family issues," Penny muttered. What could possibly go wrong? The doorbell rang, sending a jolt through Penny's stomach. "He's early," Olivia whispered, wide-eyed. "Good luck." Penny descended the stairs of their modest brownstone apartment and opened the door to find not Julian Westfield but a uniformed driver. "Ms. Foster, Mr. Westfield sent me to escort you to the Harrington Museum." The sleek town car delivered Penny to the museum she knew so well, though never like this. By day, she curated the early American collection. Tonight, the museum's grand hall had been transformed for the annual Preservation Benefit Gala. The driver led her to a secluded side entrance, where a tall figure waited in the shadows. Julian Westfield stepped forward, and Penny's carefully rehearsed greeting died on her lips. He wasn't what she expected. The media portrayed him as cold and calculating, but the man before her seemed almost nervous. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run his fingers through it repeatedly, and his gray eyes assessed her with unexpected warmth. "Ilpy Foster?" His voice was lower than she anticipated, with a slight roughness. "Just Penny," she corrected automatically, then winced. Olivia had warned her to follow Julian's lead, to her surprise. He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "Penny, then, I appreciate you stepping in like this. I'm Julian." He offered his hand, and when she took it, she noticed calluses that seemed out of place for a tech CEO. His tailored tuxedo fit his broad shoulders perfectly, but he wore it with a subtle discomfort that mirrored her own. "I understand this is awkward," he continued, "but the press has been particularly intrusive lately. My company is launching a major new platform next month. I need tonight to be about the museum fundraising, not speculation about my personal life." Penny nodded, professional instincts kicking in. "I understand. I actually work Hiram, the early American curator." Interest flickered in his eyes. "Really? I'm on the preservation board. Strange we haven't met. Usually avoid these events," she admitted. "I prefer the artifacts to the socializing." Julian's smile deepened. "You might have more in common than I thought." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" "The story is we've been dating quietly for 2 months. The Westfield Foundation is making a substantial donation tonight, so we'll be noticed. Just follow my lead, and we'll get through this." As they approached the grand entrance, Penny felt a curious shift in Julian's demeanor. His posture straightened, his expression became more guarded, and she sensed him donning an invisible armor. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Penny took a steady breath and slipped her hand through his arm, "As I'll ever be." Camera flashes greeted them immediately. Julian navigated the attention with practiced ease, introducing Penny to important patrons and board members. She was surprised to discover he knew details about her department's collection, asking informed questions that allowed her to speak comfortably despite her nerves. When they had a moment alone by a display of colonial silverware, she whispered, "You've done your homework." Julian's expression was unreadable. "I always prepare thoroughly." but I'm finding the reality of you much more interesting than the background check. Before Penny could process that unsettling revelation, they were interrupted by a striking woman whose calculating smile didn't reach her eyes. "Julian, darling," she purred. "Is this why you've been declining my dinner invitations?" Julian's hand found the small of Penny's back. "Vanessa, this is Penny Foster." Penny Vanessa Durham, tech columnist for the Herald. Penny recognized the name. Olivia had warned her about this woman who'd been pursuing Julian professionally and personally. "How fascinating," Vanessa said, her gaze sweeping dismissively over Penny. "And how did you two meet?" "I don't recall seeing you at any industry events." Penny felt Julian tense beside her. They hadn't prepared this part of their story. But as the curator met Vanessa's challenging stare, a strange sense of protectiveness rose within her. This arrangement might be fake, but tonight she was Julian's shield against people like Vanessa. "Actually," Penny said with a confidence that surprised her, "we met right here, arguing over an early American coffee service." Julian thought it was from Philadelphia. I corrected him. She glanced up at him with a genuine smile. "He doesn't like being wrong, but he asked me to dinner anyway." Julian's eyes widened slightly before his expression softened into something that looked remarkably like gratitude. "She keeps me honest," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that sounded anything but pretend. An unexpected connection. Vanessa's perfectly arched eyebrow rose slightly as she assessed them both. "How, quaint," she said, clearly unconvinced. Julian never mentioned he had an interest in historical artifacts. "There's quite a bit I don't share with the press, Vanessa," Julian replied smoothly. He checked his watch. "If you'll excuse us, the speeches are about to begin." As he guided Penny away, his hand remained steady against her back. "Quick thinking," he murmured. "I'm impressed." Panicked, Penny admitted. It was the first thing that came to mind. It was perfect. Specific enough to sound true, vague enough to be unverifiable. A hint of amusement touched his lips. "Though I should probably learn something about early American coffee services before anyone tests me. I could give you a private tour of the collection sometime," Penny offered automatically, then froze. This wasn't real. There would be no sometime. Julian's steps faltered slightly, but before he could respond, they reached their table near the podium. The Westfield Foundation table was prominently positioned, and Penny found herself seated beside Julian. As Boston's wealthiest and most influential citizens filled the surrounding chairs. The museum director, Dr. Reynolds, approached their table, beaming. "Julian, so glad you could make it, and with company no less. Frederick, this is Penny Foster." Recognition dawned on the director's face. "Miss Foster, our rising star in the early American department. I had no idea you two were acquainted." Penny felt heat rise to her cheeks. Small world, she managed. Indeed. Dr. Reynolds turned back to Julian. "We're tremendously excited about your foundation's contribution to the Preservation Fund. It will revolutionize our conservation capabilities." "The museum deserves it," Julian replied. His tone was polite but distant. Nothing like the warmth he'd shown with Penny moments before. As Dr. Reynolds moved on, Julian leaned closer to her. "Your boss seems surprised by our connection." "I don't exactly broadcast my personal life at work," Penny whispered back. "Though now I suppose I'll have some explaining to do. I'm sorry about that." Julian's apology sounded genuine. "I didn't. Consider the complications this might create for you professionally." The sincerity in his voice caught Penny off guard. She'd expected a wealthy businessman like Julian Westfield to be indifferent to the consequences his requests might have on others. "It's fine. Dr. Reynolds will forget all about it once the next funding crisis hits." The lights dimmed, signaling the start of the program. As speakers took turns at the podium extolling the importance of historical preservation, Penny became increasingly aware of Julian beside her. He sat perfectly still, focused on each presenter, occasionally making notes on a small pad. This wasn't the behavior of someone who was simply making an appearance for publicity. When Julian himself was called to the stage, Penny watched with newfound curiosity. His public persona was confident but reserved as he announced the Westfield Foundation's $3 million donation to the museum's Preservation Technology Initiative. My mother believed that understanding our past is essential to building our future, he said, his voice taking on an emotional quality that hadn't been there before. The artifacts in this museum tell the story of who we are and how we came to be. They deserve our protection. Penny felt a shift in her perception of him. The donation wasn't just a tax write-off or publicity stunt. There was something personal driving his generosity. When Julian returned to their table, the conversations around them turned to technological innovations and preservation. To Penny's surprise, Julian immediately drew her into the discussion. Penny has been pioneering some fascinating techniques in textile preservation, he said, turning the attention to her. Tell them about your work with the Washington family textiles. Stunned that he knew about her research project, Penny nevertheless found herself engaging passionately in the conversation. Julian watched her with undisguised interest as she explained the delicate balance between preservation and accessibility. As dinner progressed, Penny discovered that Julian's knowledge extended far beyond what a casual board member might know. He asked thoughtful questions about her career path and listened intently to her answers. In turn, she found herself curious about the man behind the technology empire. Why historical preservation? She asked, during a lull in the table conversation. Most tech billionaires fund AI research or space exploration. Something vulnerable flickered across Julian's face. History grounds us. Technology races forward, but artifacts remind us where we've been. He hesitated, then added quietly, My mother was a historian. This would have mattered to her. The past tense wasn't lost on Penny. She thought of Olivia's warning not to ask about family, but Julian had opened the door himself. She sounds remarkable. She was. His gray eyes held Penny's for a moment longer than necessary, and she felt an unexpected connection, forming something genuine amid their pretense. The evening transitioned from dinner to dancing, and Julian led Penny to the floor with surprising grace. His hand rested lightly on her waist as they moved to the music of the string quartet. You dance well for a tech genius, she observed, trying to lighten the sudden intimacy between them. My mother insisted on lessons, said no son of hers would. Stomp on women's toes at social events. A shadow of grief crossed his features before he masked it with a smile. What's your excuse? Curators don't typically take ballroom dancing. Community center classes, Penny admitted. I went through a Jane Austen phase in college. Julian laughed, a real unguarded sound that transformed his serious face. There's something refreshingly honest about you, Penny Foster. Guilt twisted in her stomach. There's nothing honest about their arrangement. Not really. I'm literally pretending to be someone I'm not tonight. His expression sobered. Are you? From what I've seen, you've been entirely yourself, just in an unusual situation. The observation was uncomfortably perceptive. Before Penny could respond, she noticed Vanessa watching them from across the room, her expression calculating as she spoke to another reporter. We have an audience, she murmured. Julian glanced over, then drew Penny slightly closer. Then let's give them something to look at. His hand at her waist became more possessive, and he leaned down until his cheek nearly touched hers.
Eyes?
Breath caught at the sudden proximity. His cologne subtle and woodsy enveloped her senses. Is this okay? He whispered, his breath warm against her ear. Penny nodded, unable to form words as her heart raced. This was just for show, she reminded herself firmly. But her body didn't seem to understand the distinction as Julian guided her through the dance with unexpected tenderness. When the music ended, Julian kept hold of her hand. Would you like some air? The garden terrace is usually quiet. The terrace was illuminated by string lights that reflected in the fountain at its center. Boston's skyline glittered beyond. Only a few other couples wandered the space, giving them a rare moment of privacy. Julian loosened his bow tie slightly. Thank you for tonight. You've made this surprisingly enjoyable. I'm having a nice time too, Penny admitted. Not what I expected. What did you expect? She hesitated, then decided on honesty. Someone more entitled, less interested in preservation, and more concerned with the publicity. Julian leaned against the stone balustrade, and instead you got Someone who actually seems to care about history? Listens when I talk about my work? She studied his profile against the city lights. Someone who might have attended this event even without needing a fake girlfriend. He turned to face her fully. I would have, but I wouldn't have danced or laughed. His expression grew serious, or felt like a person instead of a portfolio for the first time in years. The raw honesty in his voice made Penny's chest tighten. She was suddenly, acutely aware that what had begun as a simple favor was evolving into something far more complicated. Julian seemed to realize he'd revealed too much. He straightened, professional demeanor returning. It's getting late. Should get you home. As they walked back through the museum, Julian's hand found hers briefly. One last thing to sell our story, he explained. But his fingers laced with hers in a way that felt anything but performative. In the car ride to her apartment, they sat in comfortable silence. When they arrived, Julian walked her to her door, the perfect gentleman completing their charade. Thank you again, Penny, he said formally, though his eyes held something warmer. The evening was a success. Penny smiled, already feeling the fantasy of the night beginning to fade. I'm glad I could help. Julian hesitated, then pulled a business card from his pocket. If you ever need anything professionally or otherwise, please don't hesitate to call. Directly. Penny accepted the card, noting it had his personal number handwritten on the back. Good night, Julian. She closed the door behind her. Penny leaned against it, still holding his card. The pretense was over. Tomorrow she would return to her normal life among her artifacts and research, so why did it feel like something important was just beginning? Crossing boundaries 3 days after the gala, Penny was carefully examining a set of colonial lira buttons when her colleague Dominic, appeared in the doorway of the conservation lab. There's someone asking for you at the front desk, he said. Eyebrows raised in curiosity. Tall guy in an expensive suit. Looks important. Penny's heart stuttered. Did he give a name? Westfield. It's in the Westfield Foundation that just donated $3 million? Dominic leaned against the doorframe. Anything you want to share with the class, Foster? It's probably about the preservation technology. Initiative, Penny replied, struggling to keep her voice casual as she removed her gloves. We met at the gala. Dominic's knowing smile suggested he didn't believe her, right? The gala where you arrived on his arm wearing Valentino. News traveled fast in the museum world. Penny hurried past him without responding, her mind racing. What was Julian doing here? Their arrangement was supposed to be for one night only. She found him in the grand entrance hall, examining a display of Revolutionary War artifacts. In daylight, without the formal attire, he looked different, more approachable, but no less striking. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, but he'd foregone a tie, giving him a slightly more relaxed appearance. Julian, she said as she approached, this is unexpected. He turned, and the genuine smile that spread across his face made her stomach flip. Penny, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just some conservation work. She gestured toward the case he'd been studying. Finding our exhibits. Interesting? Very. Though I'd appreciate a more knowledgeable guide. His gray eyes held hers. I've been thinking about that private tour you mentioned. Penny blinked. You were serious about that? Why wouldn't I be? He seemed genuinely puzzled. By her surprise, because people like you don't actually care about early American artifacts, she thought. Because this was supposed to be pretend. I have an hour before my next meeting, Julian continued. Unless you're too busy. Professional pride took over. I'm never too busy to educate someone about the collection. For the next hour, Penny led. Julian through the early American wing, pointing out her favorite pieces and sharing stories that didn't make it onto the placards. To her surprise, Julian asked thoughtful questions and listened attentively to her explanations. When they reached the silver collection, he smiled at a particular coffee service. Is this the one I was supposedly wrong about? Penny laughed. Good memory. This is Philadelphia craftsmanship, circa 1790. I'll make sure to remember that in case Vanessa quizzes me. His expression grew more serious. Speaking of which, there's a photo of us in the society pages today. Your cover story about our meeting made it into the caption. Penny felt a flash of anxiety. I hope that doesn't complicate things for you. Actually, it's been helpful. The press has finally stopped asking about my personal life and refocused on the Foundation's work. He paused, studying her face. But I realized it might create complications for you, professionally or ... personally. The implication was clear. He was checking if she had someone in her life who might be upset by the publicity. No complications, she assured him. Though my roommate is enjoying the drama a bit too much, relief flickered across Julian's features. Good, that's good. He checked his watch. I should let you get back to work. Penny nodded, already preparing for the standard goodbye, but Julian surprised her again. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? Not for show this time, just ... dinner. The request hung between them, transforming the air into something charged with possibility. This wasn't part of their arrangement. This was real. I'd like that, Penny heard herself say. Julian's smile returned, warming his usually serious face. I'll pick you up at 7. After he left, Penny stood motionless in the gallery, trying to process what had just happened. Whatever game they were playing had new rules and now rules neither of them had established. When she returned to the lab, Dominic was waiting with barely contained curiosity. So, what did the billionaire want? He's interested in the collection, Penny replied, pulling her gloves back on. The collection? Or the curator? Dominic teased. Penny didn't answer, but the heat in her cheeks betrayed her. The following evening, Julian arrived precisely at 7, this time at her door rather than sending a driver. He'd dressed more casually in dark jeans and a gray cashmere, a sweater that matched his eyes. No car service tonight? Penny asked as she locked her apartment door, conscious of Olivia watching from the window. I thought we could be normal people for once. He led her to a classic Porsche parked at the curb. I rarely get to drive myself in the city. Normal. People don't drive vintage Porsches, Penny pointed out, but she was smiling. Fair point. But I did choose a restaurant without a Michelin star. The restaurant was a small Italian place in the North End, tucked away on a narrow side street. The owner greeted Julian by name and led them to a secluded corner table. You come here often? Penny asked once they were seated. When I want to avoid being recognized. Johnny's father worked for my father years ago. They respect privacy here. Julian glanced around the cozy space. No photographers, no business associates, no expectations. Just two people having dinner, Penny said softly. Julian's eyes met hers. Exactly. The simplicity of the evening was its own kind of luxury. They talked about books they'd read, places they'd visited, and the peculiarities of their respective professions. Julian described the early days of building his company with unexpected humility, while Penny shared stories of bizarre auction finds and museum donor eccentricities. Why historical artifacts? Julian asked, as they shared a tiramisu. What drew you to preservation? Penny considered the question. I've always believed objects carry stories, not just of important historical figures, but of ordinary people, their daily lives, their struggles, their moments of joy. Of her coffee cup. When I hold something made 200 years ago, I'm connected to the hands that created it. It's intimate in a way. Julian watched her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. I understand that better than you might think. Technology is always pushing forward, but there's something grounding about the past, something real. He hesitated. My mother collected antique books, first editions, mostly poetry. After she died, they became my connection to her. The revelation was clearly personal, offered with deliberate vulnerability. Penny recognized it as a gift of trust. How old were you? When she died, she asked gently. 17. Cancer. His expression clouded briefly. My father buried himself. In work afterward, I think that's why I went into technology, trying to find a way to connect with him. Did it work? Julian's smile was tinged with sadness. No. He died 2 years before Horizon Technologies took off. Never saw what became of it. Penny reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. I'm sorry. He turned his palm up, capturing her fingers with his own. The contact was electric, charged with something neither of them had anticipated. "Don't be," he said softly. "I've made peace with it, but it's why the museum matters to me. Preservation isn't just about objects, it's about the connections they represent." They lingered over coffee until Gianni politely informed them they were closing. Outside, the spring night was crisp, but not cold. Julian took Penny's hand as they walked back to his car, the gesture feeling both new and somehow familiar at her apartment. He walked her to her door again, but this time the pretense was gone. They stood facing each other in the dim hallway, the air between them thick with unspoken possibilities. "Like to see you again," Julian said, his voice lower than usual. "If you're interested." Penny knew she should be cautious. Julian Westfield lived in a world vastly different from hers. Whatever was happening between them was complicated by how they'd met, by his status, by the fact that her museum depended on his foundation's support. Yet looking at him now, seeing not the billionaire, but the man who listened when she spoke about silver hallmarks and who still mourned his mother's book scotchen, seemed less important than honesty. "I'd like that too," she said. Julian stepped closer, his hand rising to gently touch her cheek. "May I?" Penny nodded, her heart pounding. As Julian leaned down, his lips met hers with gentle restraint that quickly deepened into something more urgent. Her hands found his shoulders, steadying herself as the world seemed to tilt around them. When they finally broke apart, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "This wasn't what I expected when I needed a date for the gala," he murmured. Penny laughed softly. "Definitely not in Olivia's job description for me either." He brushed his thumb across her lower lip. "I have to fly to San Francisco tomorrow for a few days. Business I can't reschedule." "I understand," she said, though disappointment flickered through her. "When I get back," he kissed her again. "Briefly, I want to see where this goes. No pretending. Just us." As Penny closed the door behind him, Olivia emerged from her bedroom with wide eyes. "Is that what I think it was? Are you actually dating Julian Westfield now? For real?" Penny leaned against the door, still feeling the warmth of Julian's lips on hers. "I'm not sure what we're doing," she admitted. "But yes, I think it's real." Truth and consequences, the rain that had threatened all day, finally broke as Penny's rideshare pulled away from Julian's building. She watched droplets race down the car window, mirroring the turmoil inside her. Had she overreacted? Perhaps. But Julian's revelation had touched a nerve. Its deep-seated fear that whatever was growing between them was built on an uneven foundation. Back in her apartment, Olivia took one look at Penny's face and immediately abandoned her laptop. "What happened?" "He investigated me," Penny said, dropping onto the couch. "Before the gala. He already knew about my work, my research, who knows what else." Olivia winced. "I should have told you. When I suggested you as his replacement date, his assistant said they'd need to run a background check. It's standard for people in his position. You knew?" Penny stared at her roommate incredulously. "I didn't think it was a big deal." "It wasn't. Like he was digging into your personal life, just making sure you weren't secretly selling museum secrets to international art thieves." Olivia sat beside her. "Why are you really upset?" "'Cause from where I'm standing, that man is crazy about you." Penny sighed, her anger deflating slightly. "I'm upset because ... because I don't know where I stand with him. His world is so different from mine, Olivia. He runs a tech empire. I spend my days cataloging silver spoons and worrying about textile. Degradation. And yet he keeps coming back to you," Olivia pointed out. "Maybe because you're exactly what he needs." The next morning, Penny arrived at the museum early, seeking comfort in the familiar routine of her work. She'd barely settled at her desk when Dr. Reynolds appeared in her doorway. "Miss Foster, a word?" His tone was uncharacteristically serious. In his office, Penny was surprised to find the museum's board chair, Mrs. Hamilton, waiting alongside the financial director. "Is something wrong?" she asked, anxiety climbing up her spine. Dr. Reynolds cleared his throat. "We've received some concerning information about your relationship with Julian Westfield." Penny's face flushed hot. "In my personal life is hardly it. Becomes museum business when it potentially influences a $3 million donation," Mrs. Hamilton interrupted. We've been contacted by a reporter asking if Mr. Westfield's foundation made its donation because of your involvement with him. That's absurd, Penny said, shocked. We didn't even know each other when the donation was planned. We only met at the gala. The financial director, Mr. Pearson, raised an eyebrow. That's not what we heard, according to our source. You had a pre-existing relationship that you deliberately concealed when the donation was being considered. What source? Penny demanded, though she already suspected the answer. Dr. Reynolds slid a tablet across his desk. On the screen was an article from a tech industry blog with Vanessa Durham's byline, "Romance Behind the Donation." Westfield Foundations. Museum gift linked to curator relationship? The article implied that Penny and Julian had been secretly involved for months before the gala, suggesting that their debut as a couple was timed to coincide with the donation announcement to deflect potential ethics concerns. This is completely false, Penny said, her voice shaking with anger. We met at the gala. The donation was already finalized. Then how do you explain this? Mrs. Hamilton tapped the tablet, scrolling to a grainy photo of Penny and Julian, heads close together, standing in what appeared to be a museum gallery. The caption read, "Westfield and Foster in private meeting at museum weeks before donation announcement." With a sinking feeling, Penny recognized the image. It was from Julian's visit after the gala, when he'd asked for the private tours, but the photo was deliberately misleading, angled to make their conversation appear intimate, secretive. This was after the gala, she insisted. He visited the museum to learn more about our collection. Ms. Foster, Dr. Reynolds said wearily, the board is concerned about potential ethics violations. If Mr. Westfield's donation was influenced by a personal relationship, it wasn't. Penny stood, her professional dignity reasserting itself. Julian Westfield donated to this museum because his mother was a historian who valued preservation. He serves on the board because he genuinely cares about our mission. Whatever's happening between us personally began after the gala and has nothing to do with the foundation's gift. Mrs. Hamilton's expression remained skeptical. Nevertheless, we've scheduled an emergency board meeting this afternoon. Until then, we're asking you to take administrative leave. You're suspending me. Based on a gossip piece? Penny's voice rose in disbelief. We're protecting the museum's reputation while we investigate, Mr. Pearson corrected.
Surely you understand.
The position this puts us in. Penny gathered her dignity around her like armor. I understand that you're taking the word of a reporter with a personal vendetta over that of a curator who has dedicated 8 years to this institution. If that's where the museum's trust lies, perhaps I should reconsider my position here permanently. Left the office with her head high, but once alone in the elevator, she leaned against the wall, fighting tears of frustration. Her professional reputation, built on years of meticulous work and academic rigor, was being questioned because of a vindictive lie. Back in her office, she found 3 missed calls from Julian and a text message. Please call me. We need to talk. Pride kept her from responding immediately. Instead, she began gathering her personal items, unsure when or if she would be allowed to return. As she was placing her favorite reference books in a tote bag, her phone rang again. Julian's name flashed on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, she answered. Now isn't a good time. Have you seen the article? His voice was tight with controlled anger. Just had it presented to me by the board. I've been put on administrative leave pending an investigation. What? Shock and outrage colored his tone. That's completely unacceptable. I'll call Dr. Reynolds immediately. Don't. Me's command was sharp. That will only make things worse. They already think our relationship influenced your donation. There was a pause before Julian spoke again, his voice quieter. Penny, I'm sorry. This is exactly what I tried to avoid by bringing you to the gala in the first place.
The press has
always twisted my personal life into something sordid. Well, congratulations. Your plan backfired spectacularly. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Let me fix this, Julian insisted. Vanessa has gone too far this time. I can have my legal team. Can your legal team restore my professional reputation? Penny interrupted. Can they make my colleagues stop wondering if I slept my way to funding for my department? Julian's silence was answer enough. I need some time, Penny said finally, to figure out how to handle this on my terms. Penny, please, Julian, just ... give me space. After hanging up, Penny sat at her desk, staring blindly at the artifacts catalog she'd been working on that morning. Everything had unraveled so quickly: her budding relationship with Julian, her standing at the museum, the careful balance she'd maintained between her professional and personal worlds. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Dominic stood in the doorway, concern evident on his face. "Heard what happened?" he said quietly. "Total bullshit, by the way." Penny managed a weak smile. "Thanks. Thanks for what it's worth. Everyone in preservation knows you're the real deal. Believes you'd compromise your ethics for a relationship even with someone like Westfield." His support meant more than he could know. The board might need convincing. Then convince them. Dominic leaned against the doorframe. "You've got the receipts, Foster. Use them." His words stirred something in Penny. She did have the receipts documentation of the donation process, board minutes showing when the gift was approved, emails about the gala that clearly established when she and Julian had met. With renewed purpose, she turned to her computer and began pulling files. If the board wanted an investigation, she'd give them one complete with irrefutable evidence of the timeline. 3 hours later, Penny walked into the emergency board meeting with a portfolio of documents and a steel spine. She presented her case methodically, showing emails that confirmed the donation had been finalized weeks before the gala, providing witness statements from colleagues who could verify she and Julian had never met prior to that night, and finally producing the contract Olivia had drawn up for her one-night role as Julian's date. "As you can see," she concluded, "not only was there no pre-existing relationship between Mr. Westfield and myself that could have influenced the donation, but our initial meeting was explicitly arranged as a professional agreement with clearly defined boundaries." The silence that followed was broken by Mrs. Hamilton. "If this arrangement was purely professional, how do you explain your current involvement with Mr. Westfield?" Penny met her gaze directly. "My personal life after the gala is precisely that personal. I can state unequivocally that any relationship that developed did so after the Foundation's gift was finalized and publicly announced." Dr. Reynolds looked uncomfortable. "Ms. Foster, while your documentation is compelling, the appearance of impropriety is being manufactured by a reporter with a personal interest in discrediting both me and Mr. Westfield," Penny finished for him. "Vanessa Durham has been pursuing Julian socially and professionally for months. When he rebuffed her advances, she began looking for ways to undermine him." As if on cue, the boardroom door opened, and the museum's communications director hurried in, tablet in hand. "You need to see this," she said, placing the device on the table. On screen was a statement from the Westfield Foundation, released just minutes earlier. The Westfield Foundation categorically denies any impropriety regarding its donation to the Boston Historical Museum. The gift was approved by our board in February, 2 months before the April gala where Julian Westfield and Penelope Foster were first introduced. Any suggestion that personal relationships influenced this donation is not only false, but potentially libelous. We have instructed our legal team to pursue all available remedies against those spreading such misinformation. The statement was accompanied by documentation showing the Foundation's decision-making process, including dated board minutes that aligned perfectly with Penny's timeline. The room fell silent as the board members exchanged glances. Finally, Mrs. Hamilton spoke. "It appears we may have been hasty in our judgment, Miss Foster." "It appears so," Penny agreed, her voice cool. Dr. Reynolds cleared his throat. "Of course, your administrative leave is rescinded immediately. We apologize for any distress the situation has caused." The apology felt hollow, but Penny nodded. Acknowledgement. "If there's nothing else, I have conservation work that requires my attention." She left the boardroom with her dignity intact, but her trust shaken. The museum she dedicated her career to had been quick to doubt her integrity based on innuendo and gossip. As she returned to her office, her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "How did it go? Can we talk now?" Penny hesitated. Julian had clearly used his considerable influence to support her, releasing a statement that aligned perfectly with her defense. But the fundamental issues between them remained unresolved. Board meeting over. Suspension lifted, she typed back. Still need time to think. His response came quickly. I understand. But please know I never meant for any of this to happen. What's between us is real, Penny. At least it is for me. The message pierced through her defenses, touching the part of her that had begun to care deeply for the man behind the billionaire facade. Yet doubt lingered. Their worlds had collided in a way that had nearly cost her everything she'd worked for. Could any relationship survive such fundamental imbalances of power and expectations? That evening, Penny walked along the Charles River, watching the lights of the city reflect on the water. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind from reluctant pretense to genuine connection to public scandal. Now she stood at a crossroads, uncertain which path to take. Her phone rang, displaying Olivia's number. How are you holding up? Her roommate asked when she answered. Honestly, I don't know. Penny watched a boat glide past on the dark water. The board reinstated me, but things feel different. Like I've lost something I can't quite identify. Have you talked to Julian? Not really. I told him I needed space. Double quotes. Olivia sighed. Look, I get why you're upset. The background check thing was presumptuous, and this media circus is a nightmare. But ask yourself this. If Julian were just a regular Ganot, a tech billionaire with a foundation and a target on his back, would you be walking away right now? The question struck Penny silent. If Julian were simply Julian, the man who listened intently to her explanations of colonial craftsmanship, who shared stories about his mother's books, who kissed her with such genuine tenderness, would she be hesitating? Olivia continued into the silence. When I suggested you as his gala date, I never imagined it would become real. But I've seen how you look when you talk about him. And I saw his face when he picked you up for dinner. That night, whatever started as pretend doesn't feel pretend anymore. As Penny continued her walk, her phone buzzed with another text. Expecting Julian again, she was surprised to see Dominic's name instead. Thought you should know Vanessa Durham just published a retraction. Apparently Westfield's lawyers came down hard. Your name is officially cleared. Attached was a link to Vanessa's grudging retraction, acknowledging that her sources had been mistaken about the timeline and that there was no evidence of ethical misconduct by either Penny or the Westfield Foundation. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it underscored the vast difference between her world and Julian's. He had made a phone call, and a national tech reporter had been forced to publicly recant. What kind of power disparity was that in a relationship? Yet even as these thoughts circled, Penny found herself walking toward the part of the river that would give her a view of Julian's building. The penthouse lights were visible from hair-warm against the night sky. Her phone rang again. Julian's name appeared on the screen. This time, she answered. I know you asked for space, he said without preamble, but I need you to know something. I've never pretended with you, Penny. Not once since that first night. It's a raw honesty, and his voice made her chest ache. I want to believe that. Then believe it. Yes, I had you investigated before the gala's standard security procedure I now realize was invasive and presumptuous. Yes, I live in a world where my name alone can make problems disappear or create new ones. But none of that changes how I feel about you. Penny watched the lights of his penthouse shimmer across the water. And how is that? Like I can finally breathe when I'm with you, Julian said softly. Like I found someone who sees me, not my company, not my foundation, not my bank account. Just me. The simplicity of his admission cut through her defenses. I'm scared, Julian, she confessed. Today I almost lost everything I've worked for because of who you are in the world. I know, he replied, regret heavy in his voice. And if you decide that's too high a price for being with me, I'll understand. But first, I'm asking for one chance to show you it doesn't have to be that way, that we can find a balance that protects what matters to both of us. Penny closed her eyes, feeling the cool night air against her face. What are you proposing? Have dinner with me tomorrow. Not at a restaurant, not at my place. Somewhere neutral where we can talk honestly about expectations and boundaries. About what's real between us and what we both want it to become. It was a reasonable request and opportunity to address the fundamental questions that hung between them. Yet Penny hesitated, knowing that seeing Julian again would make it harder to walk away if that was ultimately the right choice. One dinner, she agreed finally. No promises beyond that? No promises, Julian echoed. Just truth. As she ended the call, Penny stared at the city skyline, wondering if truth alone would be enough to bridge the worlds that separated them more. If some divides were simply too wide to cross, rewriting their story, the small waterfront cafe Julian had chosen for their meeting was tucked away from Boston's main tourist area, a place where neither museum donors nor tech journalists were likely to venture. Its weathered wooden deck extended over the harbor, offering privacy and an unobstructed view of the evening sky deepening from gold to indigo. Penny arrived precisely at 7, her pulse quickening when she spotted Julian already seated at a corner table. He rose as she approached, his expression a careful mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. She nodded, taking the seat across from him. For a moment they sat in silence, the gentle lapping of water against the pilings below, filling the space between them. "I ordered tea," Julian finally said, gesturing to the vintage porcelain pot between them. "Earl Grey with lavender." "You mentioned once it was your favorite." The fact that he remembered such a small detail made something twist in Penny's chest. "You have a good memory? Only for things that matter?" His gray eyes held hers steadily. "Penny, before we say anything else, I want to apologize. Not just for the background check, but for putting you in a position where your reputation was questioned." "I never intended." "I know," she interrupted softly. "You didn't create that situation deliberately. But it happened nonetheless." Julian nodded, accepting the implicit criticism. "The question now is whether we can find a way forward that doesn't compromise what matters to either of us." "Is that possible?" Penny asked, pouring tea into the delicate cups. "Your life comes with certain complications that can't simply be wished away." "True, but complications aren't insurmountable." Julian's hands remained still on the table, as if he was deliberately restraining himself from reaching for hers. "What happened with Vanessa and the museum board that was a worst-case scenario? We can learn from it, put protections in place." "Protections," Penny repeated, testing the word. "What kind of protections could possibly prevent the power imbalance that exists between us?" Julian considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. "For starters, complete transparency. No more background checks or surprises. Full disclosure about where our professional worlds might intersect." He paused, then continued more carefully. "I've also instructed my foundation to create an independent committee for any future museum funding decisions, one that explicitly excludes me from votes regarding your department." The thought he'd put into this surprised her. "You've been planning?" "I'd like that." Later, as they walked along the harbor, Julian's arm around her shoulders and the city lights reflecting on the water, Penny thought about how strangely their story had begun with an arrangement, a pretense, a borrowed dress. "For one night? What are you thinking?" Julian asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "That sometimes the most genuine things begin with pretending," she replied, "like children playing at being adults or artists sketching before they paint." Maybe we needed that framework to find our way to something real. Julian considered this, then nodded. "A scaffold to build something lasting." "Exactly." Penny smiled up at him. "Though I'm glad we're past the scaffolding stage. Definitely." Julian pressed a kiss to her temple. "Now we get to write our own story, no pretending required." 6 months later, Penny stood in the museum's newly renovated conservation laboratory, watching as Julian demonstrated the imaging technology his company had developed specifically for textile preservation. The system allowed for non-invasive analysis of fragile fabrics, revealing details invisible to the naked eye. "The resolution is remarkable," Dr. Reynolds commented, clearly impressed as the hidden pattern in a Revolutionary Array flag appeared on the monitor. "This will revolutionize our understanding of early American textiles." "That was the goal," Julian replied, glancing at Penny with quiet pride. "Though I can't take credit for the historical expertise that guided the development, that was all Dr. Foster's contribution." Penny's recent promotion to department head had come with a doctorate recognition ceremony that Julian had attended with unabashed pride. Their professional collaboration had developed alongside their personal relationship, each carefully separated by the boundaries they'd established that night on the harbor. The museum board had initially been wary of their partnership, but the transparent protocols they'd put in place, including Julian's recusal from any funding decisions involving Penny's department, had gradually earned respect rather than suspicion. After the demonstration, as the other curators and board members filed out of the lab, Julian remained behind, watching Penny carefully store the historic flag. "Dinner tonight?" he asked. "I thought we might try that new place in Cambridge." "Actually," Penny said, removing her conservation gloves, "I was thinking we might stay in. I have something I want to talk to you about." Concern flickered across Julian's face. "Everything okay?" "More than okay. I received an offer today, Director of Preservation for the National Historical Association. It would mean overseeing conservation protocols for historical sites across the country." Pride replaced Julian's concern. "That's incredible, Penny. It's perfect for you." "There's just one complication," she continued. "It's based in Washington, D.C. Understanding dawned in Julian's eyes. For 6 months, they'd built their relationship. In Boston, finding a rhythm that worked for both their worlds, a move would change everything. "That is a complication," he agreed. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "Or it would be, if I hadn't been considering expanding Horizon's East Coast operations. DC has been on the short list for months." Penny stared at him. "Are you saying you'd move to Washington?" "I'm saying," Julian replied carefully, "that I've learned some things are worth rearranging your life for. This technology demonstration today is the culmination of the project I've been personally overseeing. The next phase can be managed from anywhere." He took her hands in his. "I'm not suggesting I'd follow you to DC immediately. I would put too much pressure on both of us. But I am saying we could try a bicoastal relationship for a while with the understanding that if things continue as they have been, I'd eventually relocate." Penny felt a surge of emotion at his willingness to consider such a significant change. "You'd really do that? For the right person? Without hesitation?" Julian's expression grew more serious. "When we met, I was a man who defined himself by his company. You helped me remember there's more to life than the next innovation or acquisition." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. It seems like it." Penny's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a ring knot, the ostentatious diamond she might have expected, but an antique emerald in a delicate gold setting. "It belonged to my mother," Julian explained softly. "The one thing of hers I've never been able to part with, until now." He didn't kneel or make a grand gesture, just held the ring between them, an offering rather than a demand. "I'm not asking for an answer today. The job offer changes things. You should take time to consider what you want, independent of us." But Penny didn't need time. The man before her who respected her career enough to consider uprooting his own, who had learned to navigate her world as she had learned to navigate his, was offering more than a ring. He was offering a partnership of equals, despite all the external differences that might suggest otherwise. "I don't need time," she said, her voice steady with certainty. "Yes." Julian's expression transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly another detail he'd attended to with characteristic thoughtfulness. "We'll figure out the logistics," he promised. "DC, Boston, wherever we need to be. What matters is that we do it together." As he drew her into his arms, Penny thought of that first night at the Galaho, nervous she'd been in her borrowed dress. How certain she was that she was just playing a temporary role in Julian Westfield's carefully orchestrated life. She could never have imagined that one night of pretending would lead to a lifetime of the most genuine connection she'd ever known. Together, she agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that felt both familiar and thrillingly new, just like the future. They would write no longer pretending, but building something real and lasting from the unexpected foundation they'd found in each other.